This Week in Startups is brought to you by 8 Sleep, the first bed engineered to improve your sleep through dynamic cooling and heating, detailed sleep tracking, and more. Get the sleep you deserve and supercharge your health and productivity at 8sleep.com/twist. And Zendesk. The best customer experiences are built with Zendesk. Qualifying startups can join their startup program and get Zendesk products free for a full year. Visit zendesk.com/twist today to get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups. This is the program where normally we would interview a founder about their company or talk to investors about the investments they're making in startups. Or we talk about the news in the tech business. But we've decided to do a 10-part series called Scaling Your Startup. And this is episode 4 of Scaling Your Startup. In the first episode, we talked about funding your company. And we went over the basics there of how to raise money for your startup, since we get that question a lot. Then we did communications in part 2. And in part 3, we did revenue and business model. Today will be our 4th in a series of 10 episodes about scaling your startup. And some of this information is going to be basic, some will be intermediate, and some obviously will dip into the advanced things that we've learned as a team here at Launch. What is Launch? Launch is the company that I started in which we have a conference business, Launch Festival, Scale, Founder University, Angel University. Then we have a podcast, my books, and that is the top level of the funnel. Right below that level of the funnel is our Launch Accelerator. Then after that, which we put $100K into a company as an investment, and we've done 100 companies through our accelerator. Then we have our syndicate at thesyndicate.com. That's when we put on average $700,000 into a company. And we don't have a growth fund or anything like that yet, nor do I think we're going to be adding that anytime soon. The purpose of this series is to help the founders we work with fill in the gaps and just think and reflect about what they're working on. So we hope to take this 10-part series and we're going to give it to the founders who are coming into our accelerator so that they hit the ground running in week 1 of the 12-week program. With me to talk about this important topic of building a team is Ashley Whitehurst, who has been with me for 4 years, 4 wonderful years. Wonderful. And she is the managing director of the Syndicate. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. And also with us, she's a woman of few words, is Samantha August, who is the president of Launch. And she manages this whole process in which our 15-person company, this humble little company here in San Francisco, invests in, we're going to try to hit in 2019, 100 investments, and we're well on our way. Welcome back to the podcast, Samantha August.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we will be referring to you as Sam during the podcast, as we are apt to do here internally. So you can get this document, which is a living document, at thisweekinstartups.com/scale. There's a webpage at thisweekinstartups.com/scale where you can actually see this Google presentation, and you can leave comments on it. If you're hearing this episode at the time we taped it, we may not have episodes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 done. We may only have the first 4. If not, if you're reading this a year later and it's 2020, you can see all 10 episodes there. So today we're going to talk about building your team. All right, let's get started.
Great. What should founders first consider when forming a team? So it's a great question, a great place to start. So first, you consider your co-founder. And do you have complementary skill sets? I mean, it's really important, especially when it's such a small team, that you're not working on the same problem, that you have the skills to solve different problems. Like if you're technical, then your co-founder would have more operational sales experience or marketing experience. And of course, you can always learn new skills, but being an engineer is not a skill you can just learn overnight. So it's really helpful to have at least one technical co-founder and then somebody else who has experience with sales or marketing, but operations in general. And also with this, it's important to establish co-founder equity. So the co-founders that you start with, it's actually quite uncommon for those co-founders for all of them to be with the company through the years. So through an IPO, for instance, it's very uncommon for the founders to have stuck around. But you do want the people who started this company to stay around for some period of time. And the way you do that is when you divvy up equity in the beginning, you add a vesting schedule. So common is a 1 or 2 year cliff with a 4-year vest. That means that after the 1 or 2 years, you start to You get a bit of your equity, usually 50%, 25%, depending on the rest of the schedule. And then you don't fully vest, so you don't get 100% of that equity until the 4-year period. It's a 4-year vest.
For people who don't know about 4-year vests, why is that important, Sam? Why is it important for there to be, if there were 3 partners in a company, let's say they each owned 20%, that'd be 60% total, and 10% went to the employees, that's 70%, and let's say 30% went to the early investors. Why is it important that those 3 co-founders vest their 20% over 4 years?
Yeah, as Ashley said, it's very uncommon for multiple founders to stick around. She mentioned through the IPO, but I would even say through seed and Series A. You often will, sometimes you're working with founders that you may not have worked with before. So, you may not get along, or you may not all agree on the vision. So it can happen early on that you end up splitting, and you don't want all of these founders to retain all of their equity, because as you go on to raise future rounds, it's going to be a red flag for investors in the future. And also, it doesn't make sense. A founder that's no longer working for the business shouldn't have 20% of the equity like the other 2 founders that are still with the business.
Okay, so in this situation, just for people who haven't been through it, we'll take the same scenario. 3 co-founders, they collectively own 60%. They've given 10% to the employee stock option pool, and 30%, let's say, after 2 or 3 rounds of funding has gone to investors. If one of them were to leave after 1 year, what would happen to that other 15%? So that one founder vested a year, 25% of their 20%, which would be 5%. What happens to the 15%? Does it go to the other 2 founders? What typically happens?
I actually don't know.
Yeah.
I would assume that it goes to the founders, back into the founder pool.
Yeah, no, it'd be retired. So then everybody would have 15% more. That would be typically what would happen, right? They'd invest it, so those shares weren't actually issued. So then everybody has 15% more, including the stock option pool and including the investors.
Oh, interesting.
So you'd be retiring the 16% shares.
Yeah. And one thing I've seen
50%
happen,
interest.
I don't know if this is standard, but one thing I've seen is that if you do have a third co-founder leave, and maybe one of the other co-founders really stepped up, so that like they became the CEO and were putting in way more than the other founder, sometimes I've seen it, that equity partially go back to the existing founders only. And
Who would
the
make
board
that decision?
The board.
The board would typically, correct. Okay. And do we typically see 2, 3, 4 founders in our portfolio? What do we typically see?
We typically see 2.
Yeah.
We've seen founding teams as big as 5. I want to say 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's happened 4 or 5 a couple times.
But typically 2.
Yeah. And is it always equal split between the co-founders?
Always that's an absolute word. So no, it's not always. It's common.
It's
yes.
often
It's
equally
often,
split if they
yes.
start. But sometimes you'll have somebody come in year 2 and they'll be given the co-founder designation, I guess, as a nice way to be inclusive of that person.
Sure.
And they might have much less than the 2 people who started it. Also, you might have a founder who's got money from a previous sale, and they'll put in $500,000 in seed capital.
Yep.
So they split it 20% each, but the person who put the $500K in might own another 10% of the company for that investment. So they really own 20% as a co-founder and let's say 10% as an investor.
Right. And that's a good point too, because founder equity is generally common. And when a founder puts in money,
Common shares,
yep. Yes. And when a founder puts in money, I've seen that they have a bit of common and a bit of preferred because of what they've purchased.
Yep. And that makes total sense. Okay.
So next, with your first hires, so when you have less than 10 employees, you really want to optimize your hiring for generalists. At this point, what the would-be departments in the company, which probably don't exist yet, are all founder-led for the most part. So you're hiring for people who can assist you. They don't necessarily have to be experts, but they need to, have some tenacity. They need to know what it's, want to work at a startup because it's certainly different than working at a big corporation. They need to be hardworking, heads down, maybe need little to no management because it's still a small team. But you're really hiring for soft skills. You're not hiring for specialization at this point.
You might have developers who are specialized. You might have a designer who's specialized, but often they are given 3 or 4 jobs to do. So I think the way I like to sort of think about it is you could be a specialist, but they may pick up 3 or 4 other job titles, right? So the developer might also be doing the early design.
Right.
They might also be doing some operational stuff, setting up the office, being the office manager. So for sure. And then what happens as it gets bigger is typically it goes from having one person do 5 jobs to 5 people do 5 jobs to 5 people doing 1 job, and that's called a department. 8 Sleep is the first bed engineered to improve your sleep. And why is this important? We all know that sleep is highly correlated with your productivity. If you're listening to this, you're an angel or an investor or a founder who needs to be productive. There are a ton of apps out there with government funding and products that are all focused on exercise and nutrition. You may know some of them that I use, like I use that Zero Fasting. I also use Calm. But what about your sleep? Sleep is super important. It's, in fact, just as important as your nutrition and your exercise. We spend 1/3 of our lives in a bed, so you need to maximize and optimize your time while sleeping. Everybody knows this. People have written books about it. And in business, we are so focused on being efficient and working optimally that we need to use 8 Sleep. They've applied the same entrepreneurial mindset to sleeping, and it features temperature control, dynamic thermoregulation, and a thermal alarm to wake you up naturally. What this means is these sensors will, over time, gradually cool down the bed and wake you up naturally. And they study your sleep phases and do all that kind of fun stuff as well. And different sides of the bed can have different temperatures, so you and your significant other are not battling over the temperature in the room. Supercharge your health, supercharge your productivity, and hit your top peak performance as an entrepreneur. Get the sleep you need and deserve by heading to 8sleep.com/twist right now. 8sleep, EIGHT, sleep.com/twist. And you can try the product risk-free for 100 days. You got nothing to lose. 8sleep.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode.
Right. Yeah. So when you start to build out your department, and when you get to over 10 employees, like I mentioned, you're hiring more for depth of knowledge rather than breadth of knowledge. And you really want to, I mean, even early, you want to start hiring for diversity and inclusivity. You don't want to look in your own pool of friends because, you have to be intentional about diversity. But especially as you start to grow. It's your first kind of hires outside of those first 10 employees. So when you're at employee 11, 12, 13, as the founder or founding team, you really need to consider, as to what position you need to hire is what are you spending 30, 40, 50% of your time doing that you could create a role for?
Yeah.
So there's no special formula. When you get to 10 employees, the 11th employee is always a marketing, VP of something, of a vertical. Of whether it's marketing, sales, whatever. But it's what am I spending most of my time on here that I need to offload to somebody else so I can actually focus on the business and growing the business.
For sure.
We see lots of great speakers at launch, but Beth Shear from Homebrew really gave great insights about when you are growing your team and the type of experience you're looking for. So the level of experience. So once you get past 10 employees, and sometimes you could be even around 30 or so employees, but when you really start to break down your departments. So now you have a marketing department, now you have a sales department. When you're around the Series A, you're really looking for people with 2 to 5 years experience to hire. And then when you get close to the Series B, you're looking for someone with 8 to 10 years experience. So this is of course, I use funding rounds as an example, but it's really as you grow. So as your revenue is growing, as your team is growing. And
this is a function of what you can afford or who wants to work for you, do you think?
Yeah.
Because why not go, I guess the question would be, why not go for somebody with 10 years experience when you've got seed funding? And the answer would be, maybe you don't have the ability to pay them the compensation they require.
Maybe you don't have the ability to pay them. I think also you want the people that want to work for you. I mean, it's still a grind early in those days, and you have to be humble. You have to be a little bit ego-free. Yeah. I mean, everyone's got an ego, but it's someone with, 10 plus years experience might not be the best fit. They might just be overqualified, and that is entirely different problem.
Sometimes those people with 10 years experience will not go to a nascent startup. They've actually decided, many of my friends who do that say, let me wait until they get a Series A or a Series B from a known investor. They have 2 years worth of runway and they're over $2 million in revenue, so that they eliminate joining a startup, which they're going to do every 5 to 10 years. They eliminate joining one that never gets product market fit. So some of the best talent will wait for product market fit and then join your team. So it's not even a function of cost. If you had a ton of money, they may not even want to join. They want to wait to make sure that the rocket ship is going to get to orbit.
Right. Yeah. That's some security, some job security in there too.
Yeah, I mean, and they may not care if the company goes under. They just don't want to waste their time, is what I feel like. They're like, when I got the job at Facebook right now, I'm working at Uber, I'm getting these incredible stock options. If I'm going to go to a company, I want to make sure they have escape velocity. which basically means
It's good sense.
yeah, it's just a better way to make a bet. Okay, let's talk about remote versus in office. How do we think about this now?
So as you're early and you're building out your team, I think one thing that's really important to consider is, if you're in San Francisco and you're hiring engineers who are oftentimes, working remote or just heads down at their computer, they don't really contribute to the team as much. You can hire someone, you can afford more engineers outside of the city. So I think that's one important aspect is what can you afford? And if a remote employee is going to be, you're going to get more work out of remote employees.
Also, the
something to
pool,
consider.
the pool of potential employees, if you limit it by geography, even if San Francisco has the largest number of, a specific type of skill, a database engineer or something, or a data analyst, you're limiting it to that geography, which, let's face it, in 2019, most people don't want to live in San Francisco anymore. Something like 50% of the people here want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just not as appealing to be here as it used to be.
Yeah, but then sort of the flip of that, which is us being in San Francisco, we feel it. You have a different opinion on remote. You would prefer all of the employees being in the office, and why is that?
Well, I think it's very dependent on the type of employee and what the business is. So if the business is, for example, inside.com, writers and developers tend to not interact with each other in person. They don't take meetings. They sit behind a computer and write. In both of those cases, it is a solitary endeavor. They're just writing, whether it's code or editorial. So working from home means they can focus more. So as long as they're mature enough to manage their own time, that works great. Now you start getting into meetings for an investment firm or building a product and sitting around a table and conceiving of a product or sales. Those cultures tend to work better when people are in the same room. So it really depends. And I think even the sales teams can be remote too if you're hiring the right people and the expectations are set.
Yeah, so and I think one thing that we could probably all agree on here is that you should either choose to have everyone remote or everyone in the office. Because I think when you have, say, an in-office team and you have, maybe 2 or 3 remote workers, it can be really hard to keep them included and keep them, involved in all the brainstorming and things like that and the collaboration.
They become second-class citizens, and people forget about them. And like, who is that person in the chat room? Then that's why a lot of these companies, the developers especially, do quarterly offsites. So they say you can work from home, but your family, if you have one, or you have to be willing to travel for 4 days, 5 days every quarter to come to an offsite to work for a week remote. So there's a little give and take there. You may get 11 weeks of working from home, and then 1 week you've got to be on the road to go meet with the team and do a code jam. Okay, great. Yeah. Let's go on to our next slide.
So similarly, thinking of, remote versus in office, the other thing is maybe not a remote employee, but outsourcing some of your work. So Sam, can you talk a little bit about why you would do something in-house versus outsourcing and vice versa?
Yeah, sure. So anything involving long-term vision and strategy should be kept in-house. So anything like handling customers and customer feedback while you're still establishing product market fit, that's something that, people, will maybe think about outsourcing if you're low on cash and, you want to hire contractors. But in my opinion, what I would recommend is to keep all of that in-house, at least in the beginning. Once you find product market fit, I think it is okay to start outsourcing, especially if it's a B2C company, maybe customer support, if it's just, simply transactional questions, things like that. But ultimately that should be kept in-house until, maybe you've raised your Series A. That's what I would recommend. And then if you're an enterprise company, you should definitely keep your sales and client success managers in-house. Ultimately, they're the ones keeping the lights on for your company, and they're the ones driving your growth. And I think they need to remain close to the leadership team. And then, from there, just determining what is repeatable and administrative. These are the items that I would consider outsourcing. So, for example, accounting, Zendu's in our portfolio. They handle our accounting here at launch. Taxes, that's an obvious one. Definitely outsource that. You should not be handling that yourself.
Legal. HR now is often, and
absolutely.
payroll. This used to be in the beginning days of startups. People don't remember this, but maybe 15 years ago, one of the first hires you would make, like maybe hire number 5, 6, or 7, would be your HR manager.
Right.
And now that doesn't exist in a company.
Yeah.
And your accounting department would be in the 6, 7, 8 range. So after you had your product team and your first salespeople, then you would hire an accountant and sometimes even a lawyer in-house, which was weird to think back on those days.
Yeah.
Now there are so many providers for these. And then you think about office space too. You used to also, it's so weird, in the 90s, hiring an office manager, an accountant, an HR person. This was like the first three, and a secretary / receptionist was like the first 4 hires. So of your first 10, 4 of them don't exist as internal positions anymore. WeWork is your front desk and office. Zendu or whatever accounting firm you use. Payroll is outsourced. HR is outsourced to a PEO typically. And then actually you'd also have the people who ran the server closet, the sysadmins, racking your servers. So that'd probably be about 5 positions that are no longer standard in a company.
Yeah, and even tech. So, it's very, very common for, maybe for one of the founders to be technical and then for them to just outsource the team. So working with a dev shop or utilizing someone like, or something like Upwork, that's very common now also.
Yeah, which I don't recommend. I think when you hire those dev shops, you don't accrue the knowledge into the company. And then you can't move as fast because you're waiting on some dev shop that has 4 different customers. And I see the companies that have in-house developers have a cadence and a pace that is so much better. If we think about Fitbod in our portfolio and how fast they are going, and then another company, Steezy, both of them are in the subscription-based business, but Steezy's had to hire a team now. They're not outsourcing, but they're in the process of hiring their developers. And one company can just go much faster because the developers are in-house. And if you hire developers and they leave, you might be over a barrel and not be able to keep improving your product. So the product innovation cycle is so low.
Yeah, that's true. And then just one other kind of added benefit to outsourcing that you may not think about is the benefit of different time zones. It is really cool to outsource a project to the team at the end of the day and then come in the next day and have everything complete because they're working while you're sleeping.
Yeah, and there's a difference between outsourcing to a company that builds apps versus building a remote developer team. So that's something most people think is the same thing. If you hire 4 developers in South America or Europe or another region where there's more developers, or Canada, more developers available, and they're on your payroll and you're their only customer, well, that's different than having an outsourced company where you're one of X number of customers and you just have to wait until, and you're constantly pushing them. And all they want to do is, when these outsource firms, the real danger is they want to do the least amount of work possible for the highest amount of pay because that's how they make a profit. Whereas internally, you don't have that issue, right? You pay once and then those people are 100% dedicated. They're not distracted. So, okay, great.
Yeah. And then just one other piece of feedback I would give is to try to utilize SaaS versus contractors when you can and when it makes sense. So an example of that would be outsourcing accounting. So instead of hiring just one single accountant who, like you mentioned, might have several different clients and might not be focused or whatever, there are SaaS products that you can find where essentially if you may not have a dedicated representative in all cases, however, that everyone on their team is hopefully on the same page, and even if they're out sick or whatever, it doesn't work well with them, they'll have someone to kind of slot in, and it won't affect your business.
There'll be better redundancy and scalability with those SaaS plus services companies. So if you're using Zenefits or Rippling or Gusto. I know we use Rippling at one company, Gusto at another one of our companies. We see. I used to use TriNet back in the day.
We've used Zenefits. Yeah.
We use Zenefits. There's all these different solutions out there that work really well, and they have multiple people working in their companies. So if one person's on vacation, your whole department. So outsourcing actually makes the resiliency of that department even better. Because they have to deal with turnover, and you don't have to deal with turnover, except in critical positions. Zendesk is also, I think they're a sponsor of this podcast.
Yeah.
And Zendesk is great too. All that software that you can use. I don't know if Zendesk provides actual help desk employees, but they're kind of the standard, and using that software will make you bionic because all the data gets stored in it. So the next person you hire starts on second base or third base. You all know that Zendesk is the world's best customer support system. But what you may not know is Zendesk now has the Zendesk Suite, which is a range of products that will help you engage customers who care about your products and services, especially when they're in their moment of need. This means you can have conversations with them that are seamless, all in one place, and keep your agents super productive. This includes also the knowledge base where you can store all that knowledge that your agents or the customers can access, as well as live chat. When you come to a website, you see that little chat box and you start talking to a person, you solve your problem, and then they think, oh, wow, this is a company that I can trust and that loves and cares for me as a customer. Well, that's the relationship you want to have as a startup. And Zendesk knows that, and they want to give the startups who listen to This Week in Startups the ability to use their product at a ridiculously affordable price. When you hear this deal, it is going to blow your mind. Qualifying startups, those are the ones with Series B or below and under 100 employees, can join the startup program and get Zendesk's products for free for a full year. I kid you not. I don't know how long they're going to do this for, but they want to capture the early stage startups and they want to grow with you and support you. And they want you to understand that customer service is something you should be doing from day one. So go to zendesk.com/twist, zendesk.com/twist to get started today, and you'll get it for free for a full year. But I don't know how long they're going to keep this offer up. They may get too many people. And if you are wondering who uses Zendesk, I mean, this is the dream list of companies. Airbnb. Think about that. If you have customer support issues in your Airbnb, there's a lot at stake, right? On both sides of that marketplace. Slack, which is going public next month. And Peloton, which sells a product that costs $4 or $5 grand and is $30, $40, $50 a month. These companies can't screw around. They need to have perfect customer support, and they get perfect customer support done with Zendesk. Go to zendesk.com/twist and get started today. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode.
Yeah. So speaking of HR tools, Sam, what are, can you talk a little bit about the hiring process and some tools that can make you bionic?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd recommend is to create structure and a repeatable process. So you always want to have a hiring plan and stay ahead. All too often we see companies and, especially in our portfolio, and, we'll go to a board meeting and they'll say, oh, well, right now we're really behind on tech. We're hiring for 5 developers. Essentially, you would be looking 6 months ahead, and they would have already known that they needed developers and already have them onboarded before they actually need them. So what I would recommend is to try to stay about 6 months ahead for each hire, because it does take about 6 months for an employee to get acclimated into a role and, settle into what they're going to be doing.
I think another way to look at that is on an individual. If you just thought about individuals like CPUs or GPUs, you wouldn't want to burn them at 100 or 110% of the CPU's capacity, at least not for too long, because They burn out and quit. And one way to make your organization grow is to say, I'm going to keep everybody at 80%, which is what I like to do here, which is, hey, let's have enough salespeople that there's a little bit of extra time for them to not be burnt out, to have a little extra capacity. And so sometimes you'll fill that capacity, but then other times you'll have a surplus of that, which then can be deployed to special projects, et cetera. And redundancy and better communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, be proactive and stay focused. So proactively reaching out and utilizing tools like LinkedIn Talent Solutions has worked really well for us. So instead of just setting up a job description and being passive about it, what I like to do is set some sort of regimen. So, every day, reach out to 5 different candidates that may look like a good fit for the role. So don't just kind of set it and forget it if you have the time. Oftentimes if we get busy, sometimes we'll put a job posting up and then kind of forget about it. And so we'll have all of these people taking the time applying for this position and not hearing back from us.
Which is bad.
That's bad.
It's bad it's bad karma. It's also bad form, and it's bad for your brand.
Right.
If you're hiring, people should get a response within a day or two, one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And we've used a bunch of different tools for this. LinkedIn is obviously the low-hanging fruit for all of this because everybody's on there, and you can find passive job seekers. People like AngelList, I think.
Yeah, and
and using your network.
Yeah, and another note on that is just keeping your job board updated also, because it is a waste of time for all these candidates to be applying for a role that doesn't exist or has expired. Another tool that I would recommend is Breezy HR. So we have, I think we're hiring for like 5 roles right now, and we have these pipelines set up. And as you move the candidates along the pipelines, the tool will automatically send certain emails or schedule
like a
a certain
Kanban
interview.
board.
Yeah, and we treat it like a sales process. So basically, keeping the pipelines, keeping everyone updated, following out, being proactive, and that's been working really well for us.
The other thing I like is for the founders to write the job descriptions themselves. And I think everybody writes their job descriptions so dry that if you actually write something personal with some enthusiasm about what you're doing and the mission, because you really want missionaries, not mercenaries. You don't want somebody who's just going on to Craigslist or whatever and just firing zillions of resumes out with a generic cover letter. You want to try to connect with people in that process. So I like to write a blog post. You guys have probably seen me do that, or talk about what we're looking for on social media, and being opportunistic as well. You may find somebody who doesn't fit an exact role. In fact, Sam, that's when you came here. We were like, didn't have an exact role, but we knew you were talented. We knew you were interested in investing in companies, and we created a role, right? So I think being a little flexible. If talent shows up, find a role for them, especially in the early days of your startup.
Mm-hmm. And also, there's a good example recently of, infusing some personality into your job ad and talking about your company a little bit. Density did a really good job of this. The CEO of the company wrote a letter to the new employee.
Oh.
So they were hiring for, a head of channel partnership or something like that. And he sent, it was, the letter was to everyone, but he said, specifically, this is for our new employee, our new team member.
Got it. Like a welcome letter.
Like a welcome. And this is what we're building. And this is why we need you. And, it was very well done.
Yeah. Something unique in hiring is a good idea, I believe. And I think reaching out to people and asking people, hey, we're looking to fill this position. I wonder if you know anybody, or if you might be interested yourself. It's kind of like a deft move if you're cold emailing somebody like, hey, we're hiring for this position. Do you know anybody? But you really want that person? Or maybe you're interested. It's like an interesting way to sort of do it subtly. Maybe that's not so subtle.
Great. Let's discuss organizational structure.
Oh, boy.
So it's really, really important to establish and communicate ownership within the structure. So this means ideally each person in the early days has between 3 and 5 things they're responsible for, that they have ownership over, that they need to report on and communicate to their manager. In this case, it's a founder. But the caveat is that there might be a founding team, and employees need to report into one manager. So splitting that up amongst the founders is really important. If you want to have a sort of flat organization and where it's just the founders are in charge, and there's 2 of them, and then there's 5, 10 employees, each person should only have one person they're reporting into.
Yeah, it's a little confusing to have clear every decision with 2 people. That makes it confounding for the employee.
Yes.
Also, for the founders, you might get founder shopping, where you're getting permission shopping. Like, I'm going to go to one founder. Let me see if Sam gives me one thing. Let me ask Jason the same question, see if Jason gives me a different answer that I want. So even for the co-founders, it's better for them to establish clear lines of who reports into who, for sure.
It's inefficient to be reporting to more than one person and having responsibilities dictated to you in a different way, where you might be confusing. So one manager, clear responsibilities that you can have ownership over, and it's also important to build an org chart. So visualize your team, because this is going to change as you grow and you move to a more management tiered structure. You'll want to have that visualization so the employees can see it and they can adapt, and then adapt as you grow. So the org chart will change, the management structure will change. There's a company in our portfolio that has something called sales pods. So as they've grown, they've created these sales pods where it's 3 or 4 people on each sales team.
An SDR, an account executive, and typically a customer success person. So you have the SDR who sources leads, the account executive who closes it, and then the customer success person who makes sure they don't churn, they don't quit
Right.
after it's been sold. I know the company you're talking about.
Right. And this wasn't something they started with. This is something they grew to.
Yeah.
And as long as every employee in the company understands the structure of the organization as it changes and as you grow, there's no problem. It's okay to change. You're going to.
Yeah.
As a
You
function
want
of
to also
growing.
be super clear with people on what the outcome you're looking for. And what I've tried to do later in my career is say, here's the outcome and here's why that's important. Here's the why behind the outcome. So if I say here at launch, like, hey, I want to have 50 people in the final interviews for the accelerator. Well, why 50? Where did that number come from? And it's like, well, we want to have 7. So 1 out of 7 makes me feel like we're going to probably turn down people who we wanted to accept. And so to me, that felt like we would be intellectually honest and we would have very high quality companies. So why is that important in the accelerator? Well, because we want to build a reputation at launch of having only high quality companies. So when an investor comes, they say, oh, this is better than Y Combinator, or this is better than 500, or, Techstars, whatever it happens to be. There's only 7 companies and they're all really good, no duds. Whereas other accelerators have duds. So we could have in all of these accelerator classes accepted 15, 20? Would have been no problem. People would have taken the 100K and come. But we decided, let's really skim the cream and say no to some companies that we really actually want to accept so that the investors coming get addicted to our deal flow. That was the real goal. But if I hadn't explained it that way, I'd be like, well, why do we need 50 if we're only accepting 7, right? I hope I did a good job of explaining that. I think I did. Yeah. So that's the job of the manager. I think that's really the hardest thing about being a manager today is that you're dealing with, in a startup, people who want to know why. It's not the old days where you're just like, do this, get me 50. They're like, why? Like young people today and people who are attracted to startups, they're going to want to understand why you're asking them to do things. And you can either adapt as an older person, a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, and say, I'll take the time to explain why this is important and why I want it done this way. Or I'm not going to be able to tap into this new group of purpose-driven, mission-driven Gen Z, millennial, connected generation employees. They care about why they're doing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, millennials are great.
They're
Millennials
interesting.
are the best.
Well, it's an interesting conversation about it because I think it is important to understand that each of these generations is slightly different in how they approach work.
Absolutely.
And many of these millennials, I think, have something right, which is they're not going to suffer for their career. Whereas I think we were trained, you guys are a little bit younger than me, but are a lot younger.
I'm a millennial.
You're a
So
millennial.
little
You're both
younger.
millennials. Your personal satisfaction, your personal enjoyment at work, you were told this was important, correct? That you should be fulfilled at work, and you should enjoy it. It should match your personal mission statement.
I don't know if we were told that. I think
told that.
You believe that.
we just inherently believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Why would you want to be miserable 50, 60
we were
hours a
told
week?
to suck it up and to put in the effort and to get the reward. So, wait in line for 10 years, suck it up. That was part of it. Like part of getting ahead was just doing what your boss asked you to do and not questioning, right? And we're probably that last generation that felt that way. So if you tell people just do it because I'm telling you to do it, that doesn't work. I don't think that works. How would you guys take that if I just said, just do it?
Well, look, I
don't think I've ever done that, right?
no, I respect authority and people that are, I respect managers and people that are above me in a career, but there has to be some reason behind it.
Yeah.
There has to be some, if it's for no good reason, I would question it, surely.
Yeah. You'd be like, why am I working for this person if they're not going to take the time to actually explain why we're doing this? I don't know how the Gen Z employees think about this, but somebody told me it's like skipping a generation and they're actually super ambitious.
So millennials are not, is what you're saying.
Well, I think most people would say the millennials view their friendships and their experiences as more important than their careers or equally. I don't know. Do you guys feel that way? Or do you feel your peers feel that way? Do your peers feel that going to Coachella and where they went skiing is as important?
Not my peers.
Not my peers either. Yeah, this is a tough one to answer.
I think it's important.
On behalf of all millennials.
Yes.
Well, it is important, I think, to understand that. There might be some millennials who actually put their experience first. And we've actually interviewed them, right, where they're just like, I don't want to come to an office every day. I want to work 3 days a week. I don't really want this lifestyle. And there can be a place for them. They're called freelancers. And then we talked about them earlier, like outsourcing. So for inside, my perception is most of the writers out there want to work half-time or a third, or there's more writers who want a third of a time or a half-time gig than want a full-time. I don't know if I'm exactly right, but I know when we put out a full-time job versus a part-time job, the part-time jobs get more people interested.
Yeah, flexibility. They might have 3 part-time jobs that are all flexible.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Firing.
Yeah. So starting with that org chart and, setting your employees up for success by, establishing rules and ownership, is so that you don't have to fire employees for, lack of direction. So in this, initially, it's really important when you're starting to go down that road, when an employee is just not pulling their weight, maybe they're not showing up on time. Maybe, there's a number of reasons
That's an easy one. Not showing up on time is one thing.
Sure, but it's a behavior that has to be corrected. So
does it? I don't know. At a startup, if they come in late, but they overperform, you may not need to sweat that. Like, I kind of feel there's 2 sets of rules. There's people who are high performers and they kind of get to bend the rules a bit, but low performance plus late.
Sure.
You're toast.
Sure. Yes, that is an accurate equation.
Yeah.
But when you start seeing people that are slipping a bit, it's really important to create a performance improvement plan for them. To be honest.
A PIP.
Yes.
As we call it in the business, a PIP.
Yeah, a PIP. When you fire someone, it should never be a surprise to them.
Right.
And part of creating a PIP is you're letting them know, hey, you have 1 strike or 2 strikes against you. So let's
We'd
improve
like you
this
to
behavior.
improve your performance.
Yep.
And it's not about the person, it's about the performance. This is a critically important thing is don't get upset at the person you hired if they're not performing at a high level. Just look at their work, tell them what it needs to be. And depending on the job, that's pretty easy. Like if it's sales, you have to hit a certain number. If you don't, you get a letter, performance improvement plan. What can we do to help you hit sales numbers? And if you don't hit it, well, then this isn't the right place for you.
Yeah, and ideally before this step, before the PIP, you would have, I guess the process I would recommend is to first, maybe just send an email or some sort of written communication about their performance if you notice them slipping. And then second would be to have a verbal conversation. And then I think at that point, sending the PIP would kind of mean, as a team, okay, we've decided this is the direction they're going. And unless something changes, we've decided to let them go.
When you write a PIP, what percentage of the time does it not work out? Do you think, candidly?
I would say
it's a high percentage.
80%.
Right. So it's almost like the PIP is the final warning and everybody kind of knows that they're not going to make it.
You've basically already decided to fire them. You're just giving them one more chance just in case.
Yeah, it's what it often feels like is this person is not going to get there. It's important for people to make sure they follow all the employment laws out there. And I think to be kind. I know it sounds crazy coming from me. But when people are being fired, that is either a giant relief for them if they hate the job and you and the work, and the company, et cetera. But more often than not, it's a learning lesson for them that's kind of the medicine doesn't taste very good. And they might be depressed about it or upset at themselves for not managing the job or screwing up. And so being kind on the way out, but firm, I think is critically important.
And unemotional.
Yeah, I think it's part of it is to be, hey, it didn't work out. We're letting you go. And there's no discussion about this. We're not going to debate it. And I think that is being very, very formal about this and making sure you talk to your HR company or a representative. And if there's some legal issue around here, you definitely want to get legal involved if it has something to do with anything nefarious. We had somebody here who was working as a sales executive and moonlighting for one of our customers. as a freelance sales executive for them. And this dipshit, and I don't use that term lightly, didn't think we would find out that while working for us, they were also sending emails to our list of customers to sell a product where we knew the CEO. And the CEO, when I called him and I said, did you employ one of my employees to sell for you into the same group of people? Did you know that he stole our database and was using it to send to yours? Because this person is so dumb, they did it from their work email. So they were sending emails from our work email to sell your product. He goes, he told me that you were okay with it. And I was like, wow. So there's, now you got lying going on. We just let go of that person immediately. Like, oh my God. So you do need to document everything.
It's a great example of why it's important to document everything. Because when you're fired, oftentimes you are eligible for unemployment. Well, that unemployment counts against the company. You know, those are points against the company, and your unemployment rate goes, the tax rate is increased.
Yeah.
So just because if you're fired for cause and you've documented everything, the company can fight back against that.
Yeah.
So it's really important, and it's part of the performance improvement plan as well, but just to document everything. Even if it's a conversation you've had with someone, I'll use a trivial example if someone's late, but you say, you really can't be late again. This is 5 times in the last 2 weeks. Yep. Then you follow up with an email and say, hey, per our conversation, just want to get this in writing, just letting you know. So that there's no surprises. Yeah. It goes back to nobody should be surprised that they're being fired.
Very good.
So it's also important to trust your gut and fire fast, and to be graceful and professional about it. Yeah. So I've been accused of loving the firing process, but I promise I don't. One of my biggest pet peeves is having my time wasted. And I feel like that should be everyone's pet peeve. So if there's an employee that's no longer being efficient within your organization, is not pulling their weight, is bringing other people down around them, there's no growth for them here.
Yeah.
It's important to fire them immediately. And that to me is not an unhappy conversation. It's
good for them.
It's good for both of you.
Yeah.
And it's just important to be quite quick about it.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you want to be empathetic without being emotional. You want to be kind, give them a soft landing. If it's not, an egregious error on their part or something really terrible, like stealing.
If they were stealing from you, that's one thing.
Yes.
But if it didn't work out, the best piece of advice I ever got was, here's 2 weeks severance or 1 week severance, even if you don't have that as a formal policy. You don't need to have that as a formal policy, but if you were, and startups are under no obligation to give severance, but if you said, hey, we're eliminating the position, or we don't need you anymore, or it didn't work out, we don't think you're right for the position, or you're not hitting the numbers, it doesn't cost you much to give 1 week of severance.
It doesn't.
And then people can sign their exit papers and you can leave on a good note. Because as one person told me, enemies accumulate.
Yes, they do.
And if you are firing a lot of people, and I've had to do layoffs at companies where I laid off 50 people at once, you go on Glassdoor and there's no way around it. You are going to get savaged when you lay off 50 people. And there's no good way to do it. So you just have to be as graceful and professional as possible. And there are plenty of HR professionals out there who will help you do it.
Yep. I would argue that ideally it should be the person who manages that employee.
I'm out of this business now, by the way. I don't do it anymore.
You've outsourced.
I've outsourced. I'm just please leave me out of it now. But I think that's also something for CEOs to know is like, if it's your management team, if it's one of your top 3 or 4 people, sure, it's your responsibility. If it's anybody else, sometimes the CEO getting involved creates this like jumping the hierarchy, which then they're lobbying, oh, my manager is the problem, it's not me. And it just becomes, you want to be able to say, listen, we have a director of sales, we have a VP of engineering, whatever it is, there's a design director, and she is in charge. And she made this decision and she is responsible for the outcome of her sales team, and that's it. There's no need to talk to the CEO. Right. They've given autonomy to the department head to do this.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I would single her out though as the one that made the decision. I would probably say we made this decision.
Yeah, I wouldn't
single her out.
Yeah, we made the decision is also good.
Yeah,
I think the language you use too is really important. I don't appreciate when people are, quote, let go. I think you are being fired. There's no longer a position available for you here. And, you know, obviously you can go back to whatever the performance improvement plan was and what you've documented. But I think you shouldn't mince words in this situation.
Yeah.
You know,
Be clear.
Yeah. Be crystal clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add to this is I don't think you always, and this is just how I was kind of trained, but you don't have to give a reason either. You just, you know, really you can just say, you know, it doesn't make sense, you know.
Not a fit.
Not a fit.
Yeah, it's not a fit is fine. I think if it's an at will, again, get legal advice if you need it, if it's a sticky situation. But generally speaking, we live in America, which is an at will work environment. And so that means the employee can leave at any time, and the employer can fire an employee at any time for any reason. And that is a good thing in America because it keeps our system vibrant and fluid. Whereas in Europe or some other places, there are many employee protections, and the founder of the company might be responsible for a year, where they might have to go to a court and lobby them to fire a person, like in France or other countries. And entrepreneurs get really scared about starting a company in those countries because they're on the hook.
Yeah, and you don't know how that employee is going to feel in the moment. So one thing I would recommend is to, you know, if they start to ask you questions, which they most likely will, to just say, you know what, let's go ahead and set up an exit interview. You know, this meeting's over, and kind of deflect that because you don't want to be having that conversation with them in that moment.
No. Yeah, give them a little bit of time to decompress from it. Okay.
Yeah, and then the last, of course, is communicating the information to your team.
Yeah.
And the reason the person who does the firing communicates it, of course, after the employee has already been let go.
Yes.
That's very important. They should be the first person to know outside of the management team. And do it in a way that doesn't invite gossip. It's important to be direct about it. Again, direct communication is always important, and not to invite any type of gossip.
Yeah, that's not classy.
Yeah.
It's very easy to be like, oh, yeah, that person was a schmuck. Oh, that person was a disaster. I just did it. I talked about this person who was unethical and was stealing from us. I don't feel bad about that one and gossiping about it. But anything else in the margins, if it didn't work out, I also like to tell people, hey, listen, it's not a fit. It didn't work out. But you can use us as a reference, and, we'll say nice things about you. So I'll actually do that. And I think most companies' philosophies are to never give a reference. And so you're never supposed to give any reference, good, bad, or otherwise, because it just opens you up to potential lawsuits. I think if you give a good one, I don't see how you can get sued for that.
I think in some states it's actually illegal to give a bad reference.
Really? I've never heard that one. But I would be very careful giving a bad
Carolina,
reference. My standard is, like, if a friend of mine wants to hire somebody who worked for me, I'll just say, they're like, oh, can I get a reference? Yeah. No. Not going to give a reference. Yeah, we don't give references.
Yeah, and this is tricky because I always, as the person that kind of does this here at Launch, I always tell the person that we are firing, please let us handle the communication.
Yeah.
But if I'm advising like a friend or family and, they're leaving or something, I always tell them, like, even if your boss is telling you to let them handle the communication, I would recommend, if you don't trust your boss, like, it's okay to go to the other employees and your team members and just kind of explain what happened. So it's really tricky because it really depends on the situation and things like that. To be more professional, ideally the leadership team can handle that communication, but it's, if you're looking out for yourself, you may want to handle it yourself.
Hopefully you have been candid with the team about what the expectations are. So when this happens, it's not a shock.
Yeah, that's true.
The problem is when somebody gets fired and they're a part of the culture and everybody loves them and they thought that they were a contributor, and it's like, well, why am I being fired? I don't get it. When the person's been put on a performance improvement plan 3 times and they're not showing up for work and their performance is terrible, everybody's like, thank God. Most of the times what I've seen in startups is the team is going to the founder saying, why is this person here? They're not pulling their weight. This is dead weight. We need to get this person out of here. Okay, compensation. Slide 6 of 7. We're in the home stretch.
Great.
Yeah.
Is this the part where you guys ask me for raises? Once a year, please.
This is. So
I am crushing it.
Sam's going to talk about how compensation is determined as you grow.
Yeah, there are several schools of thought here. One of them is to not make compensation a conversation, meaning no negotiating.
Yeah,
Which I know you're
I like
familiar
that
with.
one.
Yeah, we know. So Caitlin Holloway, she's the director of people ops at Reddit. She's been vocal about this, but essentially, what she says is the only way you make it not a conversation is to make it transparent, fair, and generous. So what I would recommend is kind of a hybrid of this, because as founders you can't always be generous.
Yeah.
So you do kind of have to pick and choose what that generosity means. What she does say, and this is what I do agree with, is to keep your equity and salary static and consistent and not negotiate. But if you're not generous, this doesn't work. And then also, not paying your employees fairly will cause them to kind of keep one foot out the door, and keeping an eye on, what's next. So you don't want to give them an easy reason to leave. So if you're, setting the salaries in the beginning and they don't agree, you're just not going to hire good talent.
Yeah. You should not hire somebody who is looking for max compensation at a startup. If they're looking for max comp, they should go to Facebook and Google. Those places will overpay people. And if they're looking to be in a startup, they may need to take a pay cut in order to get the equity. And the equity is a 70-80% chance of zero. So you have to, I think, have that compensation realization as somebody joining a startup that you're going to get more experience. You are going to get the lottery ticket potential of being an employee of the next Uber or whatever it might be, or Calm. But you shouldn't have that same expectation. And to go into a startup and try to get max money when you know they're a startup is kind of silly. I'm always confused when I see that. Somebody wants a startup. I have founders say, this person wants me to match their offer from Google. And I'm like, $400,000 to work in the ad department at Google and want to kill yourself because your whole life is optimizing ads to be 0.001% more clickable is different than working at a startup.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a different life and job experience.
Yeah, and we'll talk about getting creative in a second. But the hybrid I was mentioning is, one thing that I've tried in the past is to not negotiate the initial salary. I don't know how you feel about this. I would love to hear.
Yeah.
But discussing with that team member that you're working on hiring or negotiating with, what that next promotion would look like and what the goals are that they would need to meet to hit that.
Yeah.
And so,
fair.
that way they feel involved and you both have agreed to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like the employee would, tend to be more motivated in that case.
I think that's fine. And I also think saying, hey, if we get our Series A, we are going to evaluate everybody's compensation again. And we think everybody will get about a 10% raise when we hit that. So if you join in the seed stage, we're paying everybody a $5,000 a month draw. It's $60,000 a year. You're at this crazy bootstrap startup. Okay, if we get that seed $3 million round, we're going to put everybody at $100K, and it's not going to be, ramen salaries. That makes sense.
And the next point is quite simple, but just make sure you do your homework. Know the market rate before you go into these negotiations or as you're setting salaries. Different states are just wildly different.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And there are sites like Comparably that will, they've done the research on this. So I would recommend taking a look at that. But then also, just Googling it doesn't really work. You really do need to get into it with other companies, in that state. If you have any friends or family.
Just go on the job boards and look at what the compensation says for Toronto versus New York versus Miami, or talk to other founders. We have now, 4 or 5 companies in Florida? We have 5, I think.
That sounds about
Daycation, Zendu, Blanket, Where By Us,
Shoot My Travel.
and Shoot My Travel. We have 5. And we have 5 founders in Florida. And the salaries down there are mind-blowingly different than here. Like a third or half. And then we have an office in Toronto where the arbitrage is 25% less because of the dollar goes a little bit further. And the cost of living, I think a 1-bedroom in San Francisco is now $4,000. And a 1-bedroom in Miami or Toronto is going to be $1,000.
It's depressing.
It's reality. I mean, it really is something to think deeply about. And if you look at Yelp thought, we'll put these customer service jobs in the East Bay. So when people have a problem and they want to talk to customer support at Yelp, a restaurant or whatever, we'll have it in the East Bay and we can have a $50,000 or $40,000 a year job there. And people got really upset. There was a blog post that somebody who worked there said, this isn't a living wage. And I remember Jeremy Stoppelman, the co-founder and CEO, said, "You're right. We're moving these jobs to Arizona. We can't have them in the Bay Area anymore. It doesn't make sense. Even the East Bay, we can't have people who are in the East Bay spending $2,000 a month on an apartment getting paid $40,000. That doesn't make sense."
Right. Yeah, and the next point is just going back to salary compensation is, as a founder, you often can't compensate with cash or even equity in some cases. So you can get creative here. So, for example, offering more work from home days, doing team lunches, team retreats, giving a day off on, birthdays, that often doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
So you can definitely get creative with this. It doesn't have to be just
We do a
salary.
yearly retreat now at launch, which everybody is invited to. And we're going to the Whitsundays, the most beautiful beach in the world. And I think we offered spouses too. Some spouses are coming. Yeah. So, if you think about that, like that might be 1% of our budget for the year if we wind up spending some tens of thousands of dollars on it. But I think it's worth it. And I think it'll be, for me, I'm trying to make it memorable to work here. And so the people who came on the scuba diving trip last year won't shut up about it. You were pregnant at the time, I think. So no scuba for you.
I had an infant.
You had an infant. No scuba for you.
No.
I love the idea that they can, on their bucket list, a young person can say, yeah, I went scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef. I went to the Whitsundays, the most beautiful beach. And then if we do it in Greece, if we bring the launch festival to Greece or Spain or Italy, like that might be the first time people go there, and they get to check it off their bucket list. And people want to work with great people. So part of the compensation of working at a startup is doing something you're interested in. That's why I think Fitbod and Calm have had such great success. They hire people based, and Steezy as well, based on how much that person loves dance, mindfulness, and CrossFit. And if you have that alignment, if you get to work every day and you're into CrossFit or meditation and you get to work on Calm or Fitbod, or you're into dance and you get to work for Steezy, boy, that's delightful versus going to Facebook and trying to trick people into clicking the ads so they don't know their actual ads and trying to help the Russians, get their favorite person elected, which is death.
Yeah. And then setting an employee stock option plan is really important in the beginning. And Ashley, I'll actually let you speak a little bit more to this because you work with our founders on it. Yeah,
so it's important to, there's different schools of thought on how you include equity into the compensation. I spoke with one founder recently where he said, the first 10% goes to the first 10 employees. Yep. He said it was not everyone's favorite. But then there's also,
I don't think that's actually correct. That is not how a 10% ESOP is supposed to work.
No, he was saying that's how he did it.
Oh, that's how he did it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know that that's wrong, but that means you got to go back to your board and say, I need another 10% for the next 30 employees.
Right. So typically an ESOP, an employee stock option plan, is anywhere from 10 to 16% I've seen on cap tables. And that is, the board helps you, approve that as you're growing. But it's really important to note that before you create an ESOP, you have to have a 409A evaluation.
Yep.
Valuation, not evaluation.
Yeah.
And
in a way, it's an evaluation.
Yeah, it is.
It's an evaluation to get evaluation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the point of that 409A is to sort of drive down the valuation of your common.
Yes.
So you're not looking
realistically price it.
Yeah, realistically price it. You're not looking for.
I don't think you're trying to artificially make it lower.
No.
But the truth is, if 80% of startups fail, it doesn't need to be the same price as the preferred shares, which have a series of rights where they get their money out first.
That's correct.
The common is so much less valuable than the preferred, especially in the early stages. Mm-hmm. Now, as a company becomes Uber or Airbnb and it's about to list, all the shares become common anyway. They all get into one class of shares typically.
Yep.
So then there isn't a delta between those two, and the company hopefully is profitable and you don't have these issues.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's up to the founders to determine how they want to deploy that equity, but carving out a pool for employees is very, very important. And many, even the employees you're talking about that you talked about earlier that are more experienced or kind of waiting for the Series A, Series B, they'll want some equity within their compensation.
Sure.
Hopefully they're not employee 2000 at that point, but generally they're not.
Depends also what region you're in. Like I find here people understand it because they know somebody who had $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million in Facebook shares or 10 million, whatever it is, and who got in early. So it's like, oh, you both must know somebody who hit a home run on equity. Yes.
Yes.
You know somebody, and you're like, okay, so that is real. In other regions like Boston or Miami or even Europe, they're just like, oh yeah, employee stock options, that's a scam. It never works out because they've never seen it work out.
Right.
Right. And so in some markets, people don't care. So one of the things I've seen people do, and I've done this myself, is I'll offer them $80,000 plus 1% of the company, or $90,000 and 50 basis points, or $100,000 and 20 basis points, and let them pick which one they want. And boy, is it interesting. You'll have some people who just go for max comp, totally get it. You have other people who might pick more equity. So I like that as an option for people, where you might have somebody who has had great success already and they just want to max their equity. You might have somebody who's the opposite. They might have a family or kids, or, be divorced or something, have payments they have to make or debt, and they just want max comp. And they're just like, I don't care about these employee stock options.
Well, and the thing too with an employee stock option is that there's also the vesting schedule. So like we mentioned earlier with founder shares, but typically it's, the vesting it's not uncommon to see 5 or 6 years now. It's more standard to do 4 years, a 1-year cliff with 4-year vest, but we have seen it, 5 or 6 years.
I think it should move to 5, but I think it should be weighted towards a little heavier towards the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year. In other words, the people who stay the longest get the largest chunk of their compensation. Yep. So maybe half is in the first 3 years and half is in the final 2 years. If you think about it that way, that would be interesting. And then the most important thing is employees' ability to execute their stock options. They usually have 30 days, in which case, if the company has been successful, they may have to come out of pocket for a lot of money. You must have experienced this with your friends or something.
Yeah,
you have
to purchase. You have to purchase
their shares. And I think what would be fairer is the entire industry should go to, you have a 5-year window, or whatever the number of years you put in, you have double that. So if you put in 2, and I don't know if this is legally possible, but possible, but we should talk to attorneys about it. Let's say you put in 3 years at Com, and then you left. You should have 6 years to execute on your options. If you stayed 5, you should have 10 years because you put the work in, right? And the person couldn't have stayed there if for 5 years or 3 years, if they were terrible. You would have fired them. You would have put them on a performance improvement plan in the first year or 18 months. They wouldn't have hit it, and you would have fired them, and they would have never gotten to that. So if you make it to years 3, why not give people, actually, that's the better way to do it. If you hit year 3, you have 10 years. If you're under 3 years, then you have to execute in 30 days or something. Something like
30
that.
30 days is not long enough.
I think it's 90.
It depends. I've seen 30, 60, and 90.
Oh, okay.
So it's something in our industry that's kind of a dirty little secret. And because I can tell you from the Mahalo days, which became Inside, I looked at the employee stock option plan and I was like, who actually took the time to execute? And I thought about it. I was like, wow, this person was making $60,000 a year and they spent $1,400 buying their options, or $800. I feel like a little bit guilty about it. And it makes me want them to really get a great return. But they shouldn't have to. I think it's better in our contract with the rank and file of Silicon Valley for them to not have to execute that quickly. Anyway, just a little tangent.
I'm sure. I mean, it's a contract, so things can be changed.
Yeah, I think there are people doing this. I think there was some talk at Y Combinator about some of the partners at Y Combinator were saying this is a better idea, but I don't know if it's actually become codified anywhere. So anyway, we should make a note about that. Maybe talk to our attorneys about maybe we can become a catalyst in putting this out there in the industry.
Yeah.
All right, tough choices. Here we go. Slide 7 in Scaling Your Startup, Episode 4. Team with me, Ashley Whitehurst and Samantha August.
So this is one of your favorites. You say this a lot. The ones that got you here aren't necessarily the ones that'll get you there. Can you talk a little bit about it? Some tough choices you had to make in this area?
We talked earlier about generalists in the beginning and specialists as you go. Typically, when you have a startup, you might have somebody who can find office space, hire the first salesperson, find a freelance designer, go to your meetings with you when you pitch investors and be impressive, and they do customer support. And they're the office manager, right? Okay, so now they're doing 5, 6 jobs. Okay, now the company's successful. Well, there's an HR department that's hiring people and recruiting people, so that's been taken off their plate. Okay, what's left for them to do? Okay, well, We now have an office manager and HR department, so they don't need to do that stuff. Okay, what else would they do? And they're managing the freelance designer. We have a full-time designer. And okay, what's left? And so what I tell young people who are getting their careers is say, hey, go to a startup because they'll give you 5 jobs. And if you do those 5 jobs well, they'll give you another 5 to do. And the amount of work you do is dependent on how much you take on. There's an unlimited supply of work to do. And the founders, your boss will give you as much as you want to do. Those people then are sitting there in year 5 and people are like, what do they do? And they're like, oh, well, we keep them around because they're an early employee. Well, they shouldn't be there. They should be doing the early employee thing at the next company if they haven't specialized by that time. And then the further evolution of a startup is, if you're doing it right, is you go from one person doing 5 jobs to 5 people doing those 5 jobs. And as I said earlier, then eventually there's in a department and you might have 5 designers, 15 salespeople, 4 people in HR, and that job is being done by 4 people as opposed to being one of 5 jobs somebody else is doing. So it really quickly gets specialized. And that typically happens after 20 or 30 employees. You're in very deep specialization mode. Here at launch, we're at 15, and it's already becoming sort of specialized. We have marketing, we have events, we have podcasting, sales. We're kind of getting specialized already. There's still some jack of all trades that occurs, but not as much, right? But imagine if we doubled the staff right now, then it would be super hyper specialized.
Right.
We would have departments and it would be very clear. But I don't want to do that. 15 people, I find 15 people is when a company is intimate and delightful. I know everybody. It's easy.
Oh, he called us delightful.
No, you can have a relationship with each person. You can know their spouse's name. You could know their child's name.
What are our spouses and children's name?
David.
Yep.
Rory and Ronan.
Nailed it.
I'm actually impressed.
Of course I know that. I wrote that down because I was going to bring up this point. So I specifically went on your Facebook page and I was like, who is this Beyonce? Now, Charles, I'm not sure. But no, we know.
Amy.
Yeah.
And Finn.
And Finn. I bet them is. But I know Sharon and Addie and Jera. Yeah, I mean, you start to know, and that makes it nice. Like, I think when you're an investment company, it really is like you're making these bets. Really having trust and really good culture is super important, so that the people we invest in see us being high functioning. If we're high function and we're serious about the work, which is why I always say, let's take the work very seriously. Whatever standard we set of seriousness we set will be modeled by our founders. If we're loosey-goosey and all over the map and don't take the work seriously, then why should they? But if we take it seriously, we're like, hey, where's the update from February? Or, oh, hey, you sent your March update. We didn't see any revenue in here. How's revenue going? They're like, oh, yeah, they're pretty serious about this. Okay.
So then also when it comes to tough choices, trust your gut, which another thing you like to say is if there is any doubt, there is no doubt.
Yep. So if you have doubts about a person, I've never seen a person we've had doubts about or any founders had doubts about that it worked out. They magically made some turnaround.
Yep.
Founders are good at picking people and they're typically cowards at cutting people who are not going to work out. Yep. Okay.
And the last with tough choices, which can also sort of blur into culture a bit, but avoiding blurred lines between yourself and the employees as a founder, as a manager. It's you especially in the early days, you hire people who are your friends or people that you want to hang out with, that you feel like you're a good, people think culture means, they'd be a great person to grab a drink with on a Friday. That's what people think culture means, but it's not. But it also means that you surround yourself with a bunch of people that are like-minded and you want to hang out with. Yeah. And so it's easy, especially in the early days, to, grab that drink or get too personal at work. Yeah. I mean, you're spending a lot of time together too. These are long days. So it's really important, and it's more of an internal tough choice, but to really separate yourself.
I think it's good advice. When I came into the industry in the 90s, we were explicitly told that you would find your spouse at work or at college. And that part of going to college and going to work was to date or to meet people. It is the opposite today. This is not why you're at work. You're not here to find a spouse. You're not here to find somebody to date. There is Tinder. There is eHarmony. There is a million places for you to go to date. Keep it super professional. And I think there are many clear resources now about the chain of command and who's dating and whatnot. At Google, in the early days, I remember, it was insane. It was like a giant frat party. Everybody was dating everybody. And they quickly had to clean that culture up and change it. Facebook, I understand, has a rule. You can ask somebody out one time at work, because I don't think you're technically legally allowed to tell people they can't date at work. Unless you can tell them if they're in the chain of command, they have to report it, and then you have to separate out that chain of command. So they made kind of this rule at Facebook. I don't know if it's true or not. I was told this by a Facebook employee. You can ask somebody out one time. I don't know.
And after that, it's harassment.
I think so, actually. Yeah. I think you're haranguing a person or making them uncomfortable at work. It's kind of like a schmuck rule. Like, hey, schmuck, like, they're just not into you. Like, you asked them out once, they said no. Go on Tinder. Go on eHarmony. There's plenty of fish. There's all these other apps that millennials are using to meet people.
Yeah, and another point just in this context, it's not just dating, but I think when you're having these tough conversations in the beginning, it's just so much easier to, have business-related conversations when you're not best friends with the employee reporting to you. So just keeping everything, professional, standardized. And of course, it's okay to be friends with your employees, but I would just really be careful about what that friendship looks like and, what lines are being crossed.
Yeah, you might have to fire them one day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sucks to fire your friends. I haven't had to do that too often, to be honest. But, if you're the founder of the company, I think separate yourself a bit. You do not need to be the life of the party and taking people out. We've been investors in companies where people are going to Vegas together and partying, and it does not end well. It is a bad look, especially in 2019. Okay. Great job. I think this is super helpful.
I feel like we should come up with something more positive to end on, but
yes. Yeah. Don't get yourself sued. Don't harass people. Don't be a dipshit.
Have fun growing your team.
Have
it's
fun
a joyful process.
The joyful process of scaling your startup with an incredible team. All right. Sam's Twitter handle looks ridiculous on the lower third. What is your Twitter handle?
It's just Samantha __A.
Oh, I see. 2 underscores and an A.
Maybe 3 or 4.
Why don't you just have @Samantha?
I couldn't get it. I'm working on it.
Why don't you ask me?
I
could get that for you. Is somebody using it?
Yeah.
Oh, then we're not going to get it.
Everything's
negotiable.
Sam, Sammy. I'll take any of them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie. Thanks, Sir Charles, on the ones and the twos. Thank you, producer Nick, Master Nick, and Matt, and Grant for keeping the lights on. We will see you next time on. Oh, and by the way, thisweekinstartups.com/scale to get the deck. You mentioned an investor who gave a talk in the second slide. Can we make sure we link to that episode? Remember the first one or second one?
Let's check with Jackie. Is that an episode or is that just a talk?
No,
did everybody?
scale talk, but not.
Oh, we haven't. Okay,
Yeah.
no problem.
But she's brilliant, so just come to our event so you can see her.
Just come to our events and you'll be able to see her. All right, we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.